You cannot kill your ego, you guys. And your shadow is so not evil. I hear this all the time. People talking in the spiritual and personal development fields about how you got to kill your ego and how your shadow is evil and it's all full of darkness. And none of this could be further from the truth. So, that being said, you guys, on this episode of Unravel, we're going to be talking about ego versus shadow. So, that just being said, let's just jump in. What's up, guys? It's your girl Elle, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. You heard it. We're talking about ego versus shadow. This is episode 5 of Unraveled, and I want to jump in and talk about all of the good stuff. I think it's so important if you are on your self-discovery journey, your personal development journey, your spiritual journey, to really understand these two concepts in depth. It's so important. It's what allows us to interact and interface with this human reality and to interact with ourselves. And if we don't understand these, then we're not going to be interacting with reality efficiently. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to break down both the ego and the shadow. I'm going to explain to you guys what it is, how it functions. And of course, at the end of the video, I'm going to give you this week's exercises so that you can begin unraveling your own ego and shadow. And as always, everything that you're going to need to participate will be in the description box below. So that being said, you guys, let's talk about it. What is the ego? So when most people think of the ego, I know for me too, before I had my spiritual awakening journey and before I got into personal development, I was one of those people who thought like, oh, if some guy's just being some egotistical asshole, that's what the ego is. It's just like basically being an asshole. And that couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, it's part of it, but the ego is so much more simple while simultaneously being complex. So your ego is actually your human identity. Just as you have the higher self, which is your soul identity, your ego is your human identity. And in order for you to interact and interface with what we call reality, you have to have this ego identity. It is your personality. It is your persona. And so this personality, this identity, this persona has the ability to evolve, and it does evolve as you evolve, which is why it's arbitrary to say that the ego, you have to kill it or that it dies. Because in order for the ego to actually die, that would have to mean that your human identity, so your human form, your human body would have to die. That is when the ego dies. Like Elle, the 35-year-old woman from Canada, when I die, that ego of Elle dies, that persona of Elle dies, right? The human dies. And so I don't want people to think that you have to go around and start killing your ego. First and foremost, your ego is the thing that keeps you safe. Your ego is the thing that is protecting you and keeping you safe. Your ego is comprised of all of your beliefs, patterns, and programs. Right? So your ego oftentimes is only doing what it's programmed to do because it is your identity, right? And so I actually think next week's episode is going to be all about beliefs and patterns finally, so we can really dive into that juiciness. But your ego is comprised of those beliefs, patterns, and identity, or beliefs, patterns, and programs. And so your ego identity is only operating from the level in which you've programmed it. This is why your ego evolves as you grow and evolve on your personal development, spiritual journey, your inner journey. And so your ego, though, because it's the human self, is also the primal parts of the animal. It's the thing that knows how to keep you safe. It's the thing that can sense danger. It's the thing that when you're driving, 140 miles an hour down the highway, it's the thing clocking everything. It's aware, it's watching. It's like, it is the animal. It is the instincts, right? Your ego is also your instincts as much as it is your personality. And so, yeah, when we go through metamorphosis and transformation on our journeys, our ego, this is where people say, I've had an identity death. And yeah, I guess it's one way of saying it, but I don't want people to think that the mission is to kill the ego and get rid of the ego, because the ego is not the bad guy here. It's the poor programming that is the quote unquote bad guy, if we're to pick a bad guy. It's your programming and your beliefs and your patterns that are creating the identity. And so when we begin to evolve our patterns and our beliefs, we begin to evolve our ego identity, right? And then it becomes more integrated with the soul self, the higher self. right? So we have access to both the soul self and higher self just as much as we have access to the human self. And we will be talking about the soul self and the higher self in later modules. But right now, I really want to focus obviously on the ego. And so yeah, our ego identities are these things that keep us safe. They're the things that allow us to interact with other people. But where it gets toxic is when you are really unconscious of your programs or the programs you're allowing in. So I can think of a few different communities where people's egos have run rampant. And I'm going to list a few just to give you guys an idea. I'm not going to pick on them first. So when we take a look at the spiritual community, we have all of these people who think that they're Arcturian aliens, goddess priestesses, some guru, whatever it is, and they've over-identified with these labels. And this over-identification becomes just that. It's over-identifying. And so we need to balance, right? We need balance between the truth, which is our higher self, the soul self, and then the human self. But you're also not just one person, right? You are comprised of multiple parts. Most of us have as little as 20 to 100 parts living within us, right? We are multidimensional beings. And so what happens is when we become over-identified with something, say like speaking light language and doing the Arcturian thing, you start to forget your human purpose here. You start to forget your human self. Sorry, I have like a hair or something tickling my nose. And it's really distracting. I don't even think what I was saying was correct. I was just like so distracted by this. Okay, I think we're good. Okay, so I'm going to rewind there. So when we over-identify with something, that's what it is. Okay, sorry. I'm probably not going to edit that out. I hate editing videos. So when we over-identify with something, what we're doing is we're inherently creating separation. We're saying, I'm separate than you, I'm better than you, I'm different than you, I'm special, I'm unique, I'm all of these things. And it creates a sense of superiority. This is what happens when we over-identify. It creates superiority through separation. And what this superiority through separation does, because that's what the ego also does, right? Again, an unhealthy, unintegrated ego creates separation, scarcity, lack, fear, because the ego wants to be separate from soul self, wants to be separate from God, because that's what we came here to experience in this third dimensional time space reality. And so in order to interface with this reality, there has to be a sense of separateness from source, separateness from soul, because how else would we be able to participate in this human experience? This is why the ego is the human. But what happens is when we over-identify with the ego, whether it is a very specific label or just your overall identity, it creates separation. And a part of our goal and mission here as humans is to remember that we're not separate. We're not separate from source, we're not separate from soul, and we're not separate from each other. And so over-identification creates separation. We also see this in other communities like the rainbow community. There's an over-identification with these labels because it's a part of a government program that they have taken on as a part of their own. They also have their own beliefs, their own patterns, their own wounding that has really latched onto this. But what has happened is they have over-identified with that personality, that ego identity, the identity of whatever their sexual preferences are, their sexual identity, their gender, whatever it is. And now it's created separation between the collective. Okay. We see this with MAGA supporters. Okay. They've over-identified with these far right conservative views, and therefore that over-identification has created separation. We see this in race wars. There's an over-identification with your race, thus creating a separation. When the truth is we all bleed red. Our blood is all blue. We all pink on the inside. There's no actual separation. And this is what, unfortunately, higher powers that may be are using against us, is this natural occurrence that is our ego identity, the thing we need in order to interact with the human reality that we live in. And they have used that and pit it against us to create and further separation, because when we're separate, we're easily controlled. When we're separate, we're disconnected from source. Because if we feel separate here and we feel that separation is real here, then of course we can't be separate. Or of course we can't be connected to God. It's the same reason why the church tells you you're separate from God. That's another community that likes to further and divide separation through over-identification of ego. So yes, there's a dangerous side to ego. But like I said, the ego is also the human part of you that keeps you safe. And when you have integrated with your ego, meaning that you have learned its patterns, you have learned its beliefs, and you have reprogrammed and understood what programming already existed in it and reprogrammed new things that are more in alignment with wholeness, oneness, heart-centered things, right? We have the ability to choose what we program our ego with. That is when we begin to integrate our egos, and then the ego becomes a servant to the higher self so that it can interface in a healthy way here on earth. So that was really big, you guys. I would urge you to rewatch that a few times. It's probably going to take you a few times to fully understand that, but I hope I explained that in the best way. So yes, the ego in its unintegrated, immature form, very, very dangerous. It's why we see so much war, famine, separation, and shit in the world. But when we integrate the messages of the soul self, the higher self, the heart-centered self, and we reprogram the ego to be a servant to the heart, to the soul, that's when we create massive change here. Massive change, because we can't exist without identities. We all need some type of identity, right? It's what gives us purpose here. It's what allows us to connect with other people, the musician, the artist, the doctor, whatever it is. It's just we don't want to over-identify. Right? This is where spiritual ego comes from. This is where rainbow ego comes from, far right ego comes from, religious ego comes from. So that's the ego. The shadow self now, on the other hand, our shadow is the space, the empty darkness, the space. And when I say darkness, I don't mean anything evil. It's just think of your eyes. When you close your eyes, it's black, right? It's dark. Now imagine that darkness is your subconscious mind. Okay. And within that subconscious mind lies all of your wants, your needs, your desires, your dreams, your hopes, your skills, your talents. Right? It's also your fears. And what it is the shadow is our subconscious mind. And when a part of us, a part of our identity, right? A part of our ego identity isn't accepted, what happens is we relegate it to the shadow. So say, for example, I'll use me. When I was a kid, I didn't really get to play and be an artist. And so it's only been recently, in recent years, that I've realized that I have a lot of artistic skill and talent, and I actually have deep desires to be an artist. But I had to repress that as a kid because my mom couldn't handle lots of noise, couldn't handle us playing a lot. We had to be really quiet children. We had to be children who worked really hard, who just did chores and sat quietly or read a book or watched a movie. But there wasn't a lot of room for me to like bellow and sing and dance. There were also issues with my mom wanting to keep me safe from child predators. So she made me very masculine. So a lot of my femininity was relegated to my shadow. A lot of my inner artist was relegated to my shadow, right? Because it wasn't safe to be that. I wasn't accepted to be that. So we all have desires, right? We all have taboo desires. Maybe we're somebody who just naturally feels how normal and natural sex and sexuality feels. But because we grew up in a really religious family, we had to learn to repress that. And that repression pushes it into the shadow. So our shadows are this place in which all of our gold really lives. Sure, there's also some really what people would call taboo things. Taboo being where your anger and your frustration and your hatred and your ability to kill or murder, because we all have that potential within us. We are animals after all, and we feel the full range of emotions, right? So it's where our sexuality is. It's where our gifts and our talents are, like being an artist or a singer or whatever your gifts and talents are. Maybe it's your psychic gifts and abilities. A lot of us have had to repress our psychic gifts and abilities. And so whenever we don't feel safe, somebody made us feel unloved, unwanted, or undesired in some way. And what happens is that part of us, those needs, those wants, those desires, they get relegated to the shadow. We kind of lock them up, lock them away. We've decided that they're unlovable, they're undesirable, and nobody wants them, so we're just going to forget about them. But the truth is, as souls, we came here to experience those things, or else we wouldn't have those desires, we wouldn't have those needs. And so when we repress those needs, wants, and desires, They're living in that unconscious mind. And if we're unaware of that, what's going to happen is because they want to be seen, they want to be heard, they want to exist here, they start to wreak havoc in your life. And this is where self-sabotaging behaviors come in. This is where your shadows start leaking through in really unconscious ways. A lot of people don't realize that a lot of your life is driven by the unconscious mind, as we know now, right? And what's in that unconscious mind is everything in the shadow. So if we have a real burning desire for sexual exploration, and we grew up in a really Christian home and that wasn't something that was allowed, now our shadow is going to judge women who are sexually liberated. Our shadow is going to judge and nitpick and be mean and be cruel because it just wants to also participate in that. It wants to explore that. We might see somebody who has a nice shiny thing that we want, and we grew up poor and we were told we can't have those nice things, or maybe we were just told you don't deserve those things, you haven't worked hard enough for those things, and so we then covet what somebody else has, and so our shadow starts to leak through. And so our shadow isn't this scary thing. Our shadow is only the place in which all of our identities are held, all of our needs, our wants, our desires are held. And let me tell you, we have a lot of needs, wants, and desires. And the soul self, the higher self, wants us to have those needs, wants, and desires. But somewhere along the way, society has deemed what is lovable. Somewhere along the way, society has deemed what's likable, what's lovable, what's appropriate, what's safe, what's not safe. But the truth is there shouldn't be any bounds on that. We should be able to express our needs and our wants and our desires however we like. And I know some people would argue this with me and be like, well, Elle, what about murderers? What about this? I'm not going to lie. I am somebody who does believe that that is a part of the human experience, that is a part of the animal self. And I don't actually think that it is wrong. I think that not everybody is going to want to go around killing people, but I do think that there should be more of a depth of understanding why somebody is wanting to kill. Oftentimes when somebody is wanting to kill, it's out of some type of repression in their shadows, whether it is a sexual repression, whether it is an anger and a boundary repression because somebody was abused when they were a child and now they're lashing out as an adult, murdering people because they didn't know how to properly deal with the anger. So not that I'm condoning and saying that it's right, I'm just saying I understand it, and I don't think that we should demonize people for it. And so unfortunately, we've cultivated a society where if you do something that society thinks is bad, that we've all created as a narrative that is bad, then somehow, somewhere along the way, it means that every part of us that has that potential is also bad. And then we fracture from that. We repress that. Now, again, I'm not condoning murder. Let me make that very clear. I'm not condoning murder. What I am saying is that we all have that potential. It all lives within our shadow. And instead of us demonizing it, instead of us automatically judging it, how about we get curious as to why people are doing it? I'm asking for the curiosity and less of the demonization, because when we continue to demonize something, it continues to fracture within us. It continues to actually further the thing. So the more that we demonize something, the more people want to do it, because it's creating separation. And as you know, the ego is a part of separation, and what we want is wholeness. And wholeness doesn't mean you go around murdering people. Wholeness means you tap into why there's that desire to murder to begin with, and then you find healthy alternatives, right? I know that went dark really quick. I'm sorry, guys. That's me. What can I say? So our shadows hold the keys to a lot of things. Our shadows hold our beliefs. Our shadows hold our patterns, our programs, our identities, our parts. So I'm not going to get too much talking to parts in this, but parts will have an honorable mention. So we all have multiple parts. Every time we experience some type of separation trauma, whether that is having to relegate a part of us to the shadow, like me relegating my inner feminine, me relegating my artist, that created fractures within my psyche, fracturing off parts. And this is why there's a thing called parts work. This is also why there's inner child work, right? Is because we have to connect to the inner child. We have to connect to these other parts and pull them back into wholeness with self. This whole journey is about union. It's about unification and bringing all your parts into wholeness with self, bringing all of your identities, right? Your parts are these multiple identities. We have multiple ego identities, and all of them have their own shadows. All of them have their own patterns. All of them have their own beliefs. And I know you guys, this stuff is like, this is out there and it's a lot of information. I urge you to rewatch this as many times as it takes to fully understand. And if you have questions, please do not be afraid to ask, because this is a bigger topic than people realize. And so the whole human journey is about learning we're not separate. And everything we've come here to experience on earth is about separation, so that we can learn that contrast, so that we can learn that we aren't separate from God. We're not separate from each other. We're not separate from ourselves. We're not separate from all of our fractured parts. We're not separate from our inner child and our inner teenager. And so going in and doing this inner work is so profoundly important to create wholeness and unification. And when you begin to feel a sense of wholeness and unification within yourself, it begins to repair the collective. You also begin to start seeing why people are the way they are, and it allows you more acceptance and forgiveness, which was our previous module, when you can truly see how fractured we are, how wounded we all are, how separate we have all become. And when we can focus on creating that wholeness and unification within ourselves, it allows us to emanate and spread that into the collective, because it does allow us more patience and compassion with others. Because if it's happening to us, you know it's happening to everyone else, right? So this journey is about rediscovering the path to oneself, so that we can pull all of our parts, all of our identities into wholeness. And the way in which we do that is we start studying ourselves. We start experimenting with ourselves. We start getting very curious, compassionately curious with ourselves. We start asking ourselves, what parts do I have? What identities do I have? What things are locked away in my shadow? What is there? What about this vastness of me and my human experience and journey do I not fully know and understand yet? Right? So this journey back to self, this unraveling journey, is really about coming into wholeness and unification with oneself. And the way we do that is we start getting curious about all of these facets, right? So our homework. I have a couple things for you guys. My favorite thing as a beginner, and I want to preface for you guys, a lot of what I'm giving you guys in this Unravel program is very beginner level stuff. If you are wanting to go deeper, that is when there's an opportunity to work with me one-on-one. But I'm really just giving you guys a lot of beginner stuff, tools that really did help me immensely on my journey, especially in the beginning, the first few years. But if you're wanting to go deeper, working together would probably be the best. Now, first thing you guys can do, and this is my favorite, and it's going to take practice. It's called what I call trigger journaling. Now, I know this might be in conflict to what some somatic practitioners would say is if you're feeling something, fully be with it. And yes, that is true. But if you haven't gotten there yet and you're looking to deeply understand a pattern or something in your shadow is trying to speak to you, it speaks through triggers. If you can become aware in the moment that you were in a triggered state, I want you to remove yourself from whatever situation you're in, pull out your notes on your phone, get a pen and paper, and I want you to start writing in the feeling that you're in, right? So if you're triggered and you're feeling really hurt or angry, and you might not even know you're hurt, you just might be feeling anger and you're feeling frustration, then write exactly what you are feeling. If somebody triggered you, and so I'll give you an example. I won't give you too many details, but my partner wanted to go do something. And I got really mad that he went and did it without me. And so what I did is I started trigger journaling and I started writing, you fucking asshole. How could you do this to me? Why would you hurt me like this? I let myself temporarily be a victim because I was in a triggered state. There was a part of me, there was an identity coming up, a shadow coming up, and I really wanted to get to know it. But first, I let myself be in the emotion. I was writing and I was scribbling and I was so angry and I was cursing and I was like, I'm going to fucking kill you. I didn't mean it, but I was angry and I needed to get that anger out. And how could you do this to me? I thought you were different than all the rest and blah, 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 blah. And I'm going in and I'm going in and I'm writing and I'm writing and I'm angry. I'm fucking angry and I'm screaming and while I'm writing. And then finally, I felt better when I was done. I took some deep breaths. I took a moment. And then I went back and I read my trigger journaling. And I went back and what I began to notice was that I was angry because I was hurt, because I actually had a codependency coming up. I realized in that moment how codependent I was, and I would have not figured that out unless I went back through and I read with an honest eye. Let's go back to the module of responsibility and honesty. I went back with an honest eye. I let myself be a victim temporarily, and then I went back and I read it honestly, and I said, what is the truth here? What is really happening here? And where can I take responsibility for my part in this? But the point of trigger journaling is it allows you to actually feel through the emotion. It allows you to say what you couldn't say to the other person in the moment. I could have never, with a clear conscience, said to him, I fucking hate you, you piece of shit. I'm going to fucking kill you, blah, blah, blah. We don't say that to people. Okay, we could in a safe container where there's consent. And if that is the consensual way in which you want to move through emotion together in a healthy relationship, by all means, right? That is a thing. But if you don't have that, right, and you're feeling triggered, it could be triggered by a stranger. You're not going to pop off on a stranger. You could be triggered by your boss, whatever it is. Take 5. And the important part is you have to be in the emotion. Write the emotion, write every truth that you're feeling in that moment. No matter how weird, how sick, dark, evil, bad, whatever it is, no matter how sad, how grieving, how victimized it is, get it out and then read back with honesty, taking responsibility for your part and really looking at it. This is going to be a great exercise for you guys going back to episode 3. So you might want to watch that again about understanding how you take responsibility and how you get honest with yourself. So trigger journaling is something I still do to this day. It's one of my favorite techniques because it allows me to honestly feel my emotion, say what I need to say, meaning I'm not harboring that. It's not getting stuck and trapped in my body. I'm fully feeling through it all. I'm fully expressing myself, thus ridding me of the stress that stays in the body, right? So it's very somatic and mental at the same time, but then I dissect it with honest, truthful eyes and I take responsibility. So trigger journaling, that is what I want you guys to start working on. 2 would be make a list of all the different identities that you have of yourself. Are you an Arcturian speaker? Are you a part of the rainbow community? Where are you creating separation from the collective and separation from your own self and separation from the divine through these identities? So I want you to make a list of all of these different identities. And then I want you to ask yourself, which ones am I over identifying with? And the way you know that is, where am I creating separation? Where do I think I'm better than? Where do I think I'm right compared to somebody else? Where is that separation, right? When we think we're right, when we think we're better, when we think we're superior, when we think that we know more, whatever it is, you're creating separation and there's an over-identification with a belief, with a identity. And this is going to get easier next module when we start talking about patterns and beliefs. But I just want you to go in and I just want you to look at all the different ways in which you create separation, lack, and scarcity in your life and understand that these are the immature version of the ego. It is the unevolved version, the unintegrated version of the ego. And I wanted to do a couple other exercises, but I think what I'll do is I'm just going to do some journaling because I'm already giving you guys 2 exercises and I'm telling you guys the trigger journaling, chef's kiss, still one of my favorite exercises to do. And it really does help you somatically move through things. And if you want to add a little extra to that, if you are finding yourself in a triggered state, and here's the thing too, you guys, if you're not feeling activated in a trigger, but you know that you're holding on to some repression or you know that there's some stuck stagnant emotion or triggers in you, try doing the trigger journaling, not in a triggered state. Start off slow, being like, oh, this feels silly. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm feeling like still hurt by so-and-so. And then start to feel into that hurt and start getting really honest. Start playing the victim a little bit and being like, you really fucking hurt me. Why did you do that? Allow the emotion to come up, move through the emotion, and then again, go over and read through with responsibility, discernment, and honesty. And then as a bonus, what you guys can do in a triggered state and or in a not triggered state, but doing the trigger journaling, is do some somatic body shaking. If you don't know what somatic body shaking is, it's just that. It's just shaking your body. And you know what? I'll give you guys a little tutorial here. It is literally just this. Shake your body. Just shake. And you're just gonna shake, 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 shake. Shake it off, wipe it off, get it off, right? This is why people do edits and things. I don't want to do edits, you guys. I'm too cool for edits. So that was my very unconventional YouTube video there. But yes, exercises for the week, you guys. Again, a lot of this is a lot of information. And in all my videos, it's a lot of information and it's deep information. And it's going to require you listening probably 10, 12, 15 times before you fully understand some of it. It's like reading a book. The more that you watch, the deeper it gets. It's like a movie. How many times have you watched a movie like the fourth or fifth time and been like, how did I not see that before? Or like, oh, how did I not understand this plot line thickening? I still watch movies from like 20 years ago that I've watched 50, 60 times. And I'm like, holy shit, how did I not see that? How did I not understand? Because as our consciousness grows and evolves, our depth of understanding of life grows and evolves. So therefore, your depth and understanding of my videos and this information will grow and evolve, right? So it's an onion. Everything is an unraveling process, and it only gets deeper and deeper and deeper with time. And it will only ever get deeper. So anyway, happy unraveling, you guys. Yeah, if you have any questions, shoot them down below. All right. Love you.